Hey everyone, welcome back to my new channel, Eye of the Beholder. I'm going to assume that everyone has already watched the first video, so you've already heard my reasons for starting my own channel and just jump straight to the minis. We'll be covering the rest of the aberrations from 20 years of D&D minis, picking back up with the Illithids. The race of Illithids, most commonly known as Mind Flayers, are another personal favorite. Like the Beholder, Mind Flayers are OG monsters from the original monster manual from the 70s. Extremely intelligent, megalomaniacal, and completely convinced it is their destiny to rule over all the planes, these guys are a blast for a DM to roleplay. Roughly human-sized, but with squid-like heads complete with tentacles, a single Illithid is a handful for an experienced party. A group of them near impossible, and attacking them in one of their Underdark cities is a surefire way to end up on the menu. You know, because they eat brains.
Just as Mind Flayers were in the first Monster Manual, they were also in the first set Wizards released, the Harbinger set in September of 2003. As an initial offering, it's pretty good. The coloring is muted but distinct. You can see the difference between the skin of the creature and its robes. The pose is classic Illithid, standing tall while seemingly casting a spell at an unfortunate PC. I also like the tattered appearance of the robe. I do wish, however, that the mouth tentacles were a little bit more pronounced. Overall score, Paint 13, Pose 13, Playability 15, Pizzazz 20, for a total of 61. A year later, we get our next Illithid in 2004's Aberrations. Called the Mind Flare Telepath, it's not unusual for individual Mind Flayers to study a particular ability, so one having telepathy would be creature correct, not to mention scary as frack. The paint on this one is better than the Harbinger mini. Using a lighter colored purple on the face, hands, and cloaks really helps the colors pop. The pose is also basically the same as before, but the mouth tentacles are a bit better defined, so this is a slight upgrade. Score, Paint 15, Pose 13, Playability 15, Pizzazz 20, for a total of 63. Two years later, in the War Drum set released in March of 2006, we get our next Illithid, and this one is a named creature. Meet Shaluth, Arch-Villain. I couldn't find anything about him online, so let's just look at the mini. The paint is really well done on this one, with 6 different colors used. And the pose, this guy is ready to rock. No mamby-pamby spell throwing here. He comes at you sword in hand and tentacles fully extended, looking for his next meal. And look at the head. I initially thought he was wearing a hood, but it's actually an eye patch with a golden red eye where the left eye should be. You just know that patch is a magic item. Score, Paint 21, Pose 22, Playability 12, Pizzazz 25, for a total of 80. In March of 2008, our next Illithid came along. From the Dungeons of Dread set, we get the Mind Flayer Scourge. I know I'm sounding redundant here, but another great mini. The usual purple skin, dark clothing is here, but I particularly like the silver embroidery on his robes and collar. Plus, the lighter color on the tentacle tips is a nice touch. His pose gives the impression of advancing on an enemy, preparing to throw a spell with his right hand while holding a dagger in his left to deliver the coup de grace. Score, Paint 18, Pose 15, Playability 15, Pizzazz 23, for a total of 71. Seven months later, in November of 2008, we get our next Illithid. From the Demon Web set, this mini is named Shadow Flayer. Normally, when a mini has the word shadow in its name, that would indicate that it comes primarily from the Shadowfell. I don't think that's the case here. First of all, it's not made of translucent plastic like the Shadow Beholder earlier. Second, notice the pose. Wielding a spear and carrying 2 swords on its back a la Deadpool, I think these guys are the ninjas of Illithid society, carrying out tasks best done, well, in the shadows. The muted paint job reflects this. I especially like the 2-tone cloak. Score, paint 10, pose 17, playability 15, pizzazz 21, for a total of 63. From the same set, we get the Concord Illithid. The Concord is a ruling body within an Illithid society, working in concert with an elder brain to make decisions for the colony. From a paint perspective, the guy looks it, eschewing the normal dark colors for a red cloak and collar with gold piping. Nothing particularly impressive with the pose, however, and from a playability standpoint, this mini gives leading from the rear vibes. Score, paint 12, pose 7, playability 9, pizzazz 15, for a total score of 43. In 2014, when WizKids took over, they wasted no time giving us a Mind Flayer in their initial set, Tyranny of Dragons. He's strikingly similar to the initial Mind Flayer from Harbinger, except they added a staff, magical I'm sure, plus a silver breastplate for a splash of color. So far, I haven't spent much time talking about the playability of the various Illithids, but that's because there's not a single one I would hesitate to drop on a player's mat, and this one is no exception. Score, paint 16, pose 15, playability 15, pizzazz 21, for a total score of 67. Three years later, we get our final classic Mind Flayers in 2017's Monster Menagerie 2. WizKids doubles up on the minis, offering two variations of the same basic mini, one empty-handed while the other sports a dagger. To me, a step back from the earlier Illithids, there's really nothing special about them. Standard purple skin, dark robe, but with the silver breastplate and whatever that silver slash across the face is supposed to be. WizKids did feel that we needed invisible versions of these minis as well. The playing, collecting community is split on the invisible minis. Some people really detest them, while others only hate them. Score, paint 11, pose 11, playability 14, pizzazz 19, for a total of 55. Score on the invisible minis? Who cares?
Illithids reproduce by inserting a mature tadpole into the brain of a humanoid victim such as a human, elf, gith, etc. This generally results in your garden variety Mind Flayer, but occasionally the new Illithid becomes an Ulitharid, the nobles of Illithid societies. These guys are superior in every way to your standard Mind Flayer and are treated as minor godlings in Illithid colonies.
Our first Ulitharid comes from 2008's Demon Web set, a popular set for Illithids as we get three of them in it. Called a Thune Hulk, it is uncertain who or what Thune is, a deity, an elder brain, or perhaps just a guiding philosophy. Whatever Thune is, his disciple looks formidable. The coloring, purplish skin with a blue skirt and golden weapons and shoulder armor, work well together, although the uniform purple skin color makes the face tentacles practically disappear. The pose is sufficiently hulkish. His bare torso really shows off the back muscles. And the golden, whatever those are, stabby things on his hand, looks like it can do some serious damage. Score, paint 12, pose 18, playability 15, pizzazz 20, for a total of 65. Two years later, Wizards gave us the Mind Flayer Noble in their last set, 2010's Lords of Madness. Of all the Ulitharid minis, this one is my favorite. The paint is simple but elegant. Its flowing robes with intricate blue embroidery are perfectly done, and I like the splash of blood red and the white Mind Flayer skull in the front. The pose is also amazing. Notice how the sleeves are going in opposite directions. Combined with the sinuous shape of its body, this guy is obviously in the middle of casting a very complicated spell requiring more than just a simple hand gesture. Score, paint 25, pose 25, playability 23, pizzazz 25, for a total of 98. In March of 2018, WizKids gave us their first interpretation of the Eulotherid in the Monster Menagerie 3 set. As they did previously with Mind Flayers, they chose to give us two variations of the same mini. This time, however, they did a much better job of it. Coloring is again pretty basic, but with one holding a staff and the other casting a spell, note the skull-like image in the spell effect, WizKids did a really nice job disguising the similarities of the minis. Also, note the bases. This was when WizKids was transitioning between black and clear bases. If I recall correctly, I had bought in a couple bricks early, then a few months later a third brick, hence the clear base. Score: Paint 15, Pose 17 for the staff, 19 for the spell, Playability 20, Pizzazz 22 staff, 24 spell, for a total of 74 or 78. We get our final Eulotherid mini 4 years later in 2022's Spelljammer Adventures in Space. This mini has the distinction of being the only uncommon Illithid mini released. Standard blue skin, dark robe paint job, albeit with a reddish trim to the sleeves. Pose is nondescript, could be spellcasting, could be monologuing. The tentacles are really long though. Score: Paint 12, Pose 12, Playability 12, Pizzazz 17, for a total score of 53.
While illithids prefer humanoid victims for tadpole insertion, they do like to play around with other races and species. While not always successful, when they are, these half-breeds are collectively known as ceramorphs. These creatures, regardless of their powers and abilities pre-transmutation, generally serve as thralls to their illithid overlords.
We get our first ceramorph in 2004's Aberrations set. The mini is called a half-illithid lizard folk, but the correct term for this ceramorph is Zakandi. The mini itself is a spot-on recreation of the 3rd edition Zakandi. The paint, while basic, looks good with a lighter green wash over the darker green body that gives the mini definition. Pose and playability are also solid, although like some other earlier illithid minis, the tentacles tend to get lost in the body of the creature. Score: Paint 12, Pose 12, Playability 14, Pizzazz 12, for a total score of 50. Gnomes are another species that illithids like to experiment on. When successful, you get a true gnome ceramorph, but when they fail, you end up with a gnome squidling. The gnome ceramorph has all the powers of a full-size mind flayer, but tends to retain the memories and personalities of the original lives. For a small mini, WizKids did an amazing paint job. Even the pupils are visible. The pose is basic. Is it just me, or does he give off Galaxar from Monsters vs. Aliens vibes? Squidlings, on the other hand, are basically creatures of instinct, driven by blind hunger for brains. The paint on this guy is simpler than the gnome ceramorph, but I do like how the pose shows the squidling's use of its levitation ability and overlong tentacles to help it move. Score on these minis: gnome ceramorph, paint 14, pose 10, playability 14, pizzazz 12, for a total of 50. For the squidling, paint 11, pose 13, playability 14, pizzazz 11, for a total of 49. Our final ceramorph is the Mind Witness. This creature is created when an illithid tadpole is inserted into a beholder. Making its one and only appearance in the Boneyard set of 2021, the mini matches the book description pretty well. The coloring is correct, the central eye is properly milky, and the eye stalks above and tentacles below are appropriately animated. It would have been nice for WizKids to somehow have shown the lamprey-like mouth on the underbelly though, but I'm not quite sure how they would have done that. Paint 22, Pose 13, Playability 19, Pizzazz 20, for a total score of 74.
While illithids do work alone or in small groups, their greatest strength lies deep underground in vast illithid cities. And each of these cities is ruled by an elder brain. An elder brain lives in brine-filled pools filled with the community's tadpoles while plotting world domination. Unspeakably powerful, with an entire city of mind flayers and thralls to guard it, should a DM run a campaign where the PCs are able to enter an Illithid city and kill an Elder Brain, the players should then retire those PCs and start anew at first level, because it's not going to get any better than that.
This Elder Brain mini was the premium figure in 2019's Volo's and Mordenkainen's Foes set. The mini is an exact representation of the 5th edition Elder Brain, and it looks fantastic. Coloring is perfect, the pink of the brain, the translucent blue of the brine pool. They even got the colors of the tentacles right, black for the one on top and red for the lower ones. Playability is somewhat limited, per the introduction. Not sure how often you'll be running an Elder Brain encounter. But bonus points for the stalagmites included with the set. I will definitely be using these in other encounters. Score: Paint 25, Pose 20, Playability 19, Pizzazz 25, for a total of 89. Occasionally, an Elder Brain will attach itself to the body of a dragon. This mini is one of the premium figures from 2022's Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. This thing is truly terrifying. All the mental power of an Elder Brain, tentacles that can hold a giant at bay, and fun fact, its breath weapon is brine water filled with illithid tadpoles, transforming anyone caught in it into a mind flayer. Paint is book correct, blue-gray body, red tentacles. I really like that WizKids posed this mini so the dragon is earthbound. Hunched over, with his wings drooping to the ground, it just looks badass to me. Not sure what that clear cover over the brain is supposed to be, but yoink! It comes right off. Total score: Paint 22, Pose 24, Playability 13, Pizzazz 25, for a score of 84.
As one can imagine, after millennia of dominating other races for enslavement and food, the Illithid have made a few enemies. Drow, Dugar, and especially the Gift, to name a few. So, what happens when an Illithid city is attacked and the Elder Brain destroyed? Well, if the brine pool is relatively intact, the remaining tadpoles within will cannibalize each other until only one remains. Illithid Highlander, there can only be one. The remaining tadpole will metamorphose into a Neolithid, an aberration hated by all, mostly by the mind flayers themselves.
This Neolithid mini was released as a premium figure in 2022's Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse. I just received this mini in the mail today, and it is massive. WizKids is really stretching the concept of mini here. The paint on this mini is exceptional if somewhat simple, mauve in color with a dark wash for details, plus 3 rows of black knobs running the entire length of the body. The pose is also well done, body coiled in on itself like a rattler about to strike, with mouth wide open and mouth tentacles fully extended. I'm not sure how much playability I'm going to get out of this mini, but it's going to look really good sitting on my shelf. Score: Paint 25, Pose 25, Playability 6, Pizzazz 25, for a total score of 81.
The Intellect Devourer is another OG creature from the first edition Monster Manual. Despite their comic cameo in the recent Dungeons & Dragons movie, they are actually dreaded denizens of the Underdark. Created by the Mind Flayers, they are basically brains with legs, allowing them to roam about and attack and take control of an unfortunate victim, psionically consuming their brain, then teleporting into the empty skull.
We don't get our first Intellect Devourer until about a dozen sets in 2007's Unhallowed. While it's a pretty good mini, right off the bat it's just too big. Intellect Devourers range in size from 6 inches to around dog size. This one is bigger than your average halfling, goblin, or kobold. Other than that, paint and pose is good. The larger size allows you to really see the details on this creature, and the foreleg extended gives the impression of motion. Overall score: paint 14, pose 13, playability 8, pizzazz 12, for a total of 47. 9 years later, WizKids gives us their first take on the Intellect Devourer in 2016's Storm King's Thunder. This one is sized correctly, so that alone allows for more playability than the Wizards Mini. Of course, due to its small size, you lose most details. It appears as if WizKids tries to offset this by using a brighter pink for the body and yellow legs. Also, it appears the legs are slightly crouched as if it's about to spring. Score: Paint 12, Pose 10, Playability 12, Pizzazz 8, for a total of 42. We get our final Intellect Devourer 3 years later in 2019's Waterdeep Dungeons of the Mad Mage. I'm not even sure why WizKids even bothered with this one. It's basically the same as the one from 3 years earlier, but duller. A uniform brown with a pose, if possible, even more passive than the earlier one. Looking at the three Intellect Devourers together creates a conundrum for DMs. From a WoW standpoint, dropping the Wizards Mini on the playmat is certainly the way to go, but the two WizKids Minis are more book correct. Form versus function, I guess. The score. Paint 4, Pose 4, Playability 12, Pizzazz 3, for a total of 23.
I don't have a lot of information on this next creature, the Mad Slasher. Created specifically for the Wizards miniature game and was featured in the 2003's Miniatures Handbook. As the name suggests, the Mad Slasher is a bloodthirsty little beast, charging in to attack at the promise of bloodshed, with little to no regard for the size and strength of its enemy.
This mini came, naturally enough, from 2004's Aberrations set. Due to its single eye, I originally considered classifying him as a beholder kin, but online research confirmed that he is a singular creature. An aberration among aberrations, if you will. Paint-wise, nothing special, although the eye is well done. Pose is appropriately spider-like, and playability is highly dependent on how much research you're willing to do to get its stat block. Score: Paint 10, Pose 12, Playability 5, Pizzazz 7, for a total of 34.
The Morkoth is another OG creature, appearing in the very first Monster Manual. It's also the creature that arguably has gone through the most changes, appearance-wise, over the years, starting out fairly humanoid before evolving into the more octopus-looking creature of today. Generally solitary and weak in combat, they have formidable hypnotic and charm abilities that they use to lure their victims to their labyrinthian lairs to be consumed.
We get our one and only Morkoth mini in 2019's Volos and Mordenkainen's Foes set. This is a very well done mini. The paint job is exceptional. Note the many paint details on the weapons, shields, and chest on its head, along with the yellow of its eyes and beak. Morkoths are known for carrying such items on their bodies, both to entice potential meals or to bargain should said meals be unwilling. Finally, I really like how WizKids fashioned the base in the shape of a wave, adding a sense of movement to the mini. Score: Paint 25, Pose 20, Playability 17, Pizzazz 22, for a total of 84.
The Neogi are another slaver race, first appearing in 1989's Spelljammer AD&D Adventures in Space campaign setting. To the Neogi, every being, even other Neogi, are considered potential slaves. They will trade as a last resort, but always with the idea of enslaving their trading partner by force if necessary. Physically weak, they send their mentally dominated slaves to do their dirty work. A party that decides to parley with Neogi are either desperate or foolish.
We get our first Neogi in 2010's Lords of Madness set. The Neogi Grand Old Master is not a title to aspire to. When a Neogi gets too old, it is injected with poison, causing it to balloon in size and lose all intelligence. It exists only to eat until other Neogi lay eggs in it, which then feed on the Master's body upon hatching. This mini is a good representation of that, with the body showing multiple bulges that can only be eggs. Paint is nothing special, but there is a splash of blue on the collar. Score: Paint 11, Pose 17, Playability 10, Pizzazz 15, for a total of 53. Our next Neogi also comes from the Lords of Madness set, called a Neogi Slaver. What other kind of Neogi are there? It's functional, but hardly a standout, particularly for a rare mini. The uniform brown of the body is, well, brown, and the green collar is very hard to see. The pose is okay, I suppose, rearing up its forelegs as if about to attack. If you're running a Neogi encounter, playability is high, but may be difficult because it's a rare. Really, this mini should have been a common. Score: Paint 9, Pose 12, Playability 17, Pizzazz 6, for a total of 45. (2018's) Monster Menagerie 3 gives us our next Neogi, the Neogi Master. Another rare, but at least deserving of the slot. The paint is so much better on this one, with a two-tone body and a blue and silver collar. Pose is great as well. The clear stand gives the appearance of the creature skittering forward, especially with its abdomen raised up. This guy is moving with purpose. I also like the plates along the back of the neck. This is a definite upgrade over the Wizard's Neogis. Score: Paint 14, Pose 17, Playability 19, Pizzazz 13, for a total of 63. We get our final Neogi 4 years later in, fittingly enough, the D&D Spelljammer Adventures in Space set. Also called a Neogi Master. At first I had to do a double take, as this mini looks a lot like the previous one. Only after a second look do the differences become obvious. The body is lighter, but the abdomen is darker, as are the tips of the legs. Its collar is a lighter blue, and it looks like it's wearing some type of helmet. Finally, it has spikes along its back instead of plates. It's an uncommon mini, so you could probably get a few of these cheap. Combine them with a Neogi Slaver mini or two, a Grand Old Master, and a few Umber Hulk or Grey Render minis as slaves, you got yourself an encounter. Score: Paint 14, Pose 17, Playability 21, Pizzazz 13, for a total of 65.
The Nothic is another creature that started out in 2003's D&D Miniature Handbook, but unlike the Mad Slasher, was so cool that it migrated to multiple D&D campaigns including Curse of Strahd, Baldur's Gate, Waterdeep, and many more. Nothics are malevolent, unpredictable creatures. While it can attack via tooth and claw, its main weapon is its magical eye. The gaze of a Nothic can rot flesh, while many have specific abilities that are unknown until the Nothic actually unleashes them upon the party.
Considering how often the Nothic appears in various campaigns, it's strange that, for the longest time, the only Nothic mini created was from the March of 2004 Archfiends set. And what a glorious mini it is. I love this guy. The light green body with black spines and claws is perfect, and look at the detail in its eyes. I don't know how Wizards did it, but bravo. The crouch pose with mouth agape appears to catch it pre-pounce, or perhaps it's just sitting in a corner, gibbering to itself. Congratulations, Wizards. In my opinion, your first perfect mini. Score: 100. It took WizKids 13 years to get around to making their own Nothic in 2017's II of Aberrations set. And it's fine, I suppose. I don't know, maybe it's more book correct than the Wizards mini, but it's just so basic. That's the word you kids use these days, right? Anyway, the paint is uniform green with a splash of white for its teeth. And the eye, the whole point of the Nothic, is barely noticeable. Playability is probably greater since I assume it's easier to get than the Wizards one, but if you can, get the Wizards one. Score: Paint 13, Pose 13, Playability 25, Pizzazz 13, for a total of 64.
The Yacht is nature's garbage disposal, perfectly happy to live off the filth and offal of others, but more than happy to augment its diet with the passing unwary PC. Another OG creature from the original Monster Manual, the Yacht spends most of its time buried in great garbage heap pits, eating to its heart content but keeping its third tentacle, which holds the eyes and nose, above the pile, keeping an eye out for any creature that gets close enough to eat. Despite their appearance, Yachts are fairly intelligent and can be conversed with if the PC so desire.
We got our first Use in Wizards 4th set, 2004's Giants of Legends. As GOL was the first set to feature huge-size minis, this Use is well done but slipped through the cracks. The extra dark wash on its body conveys the grime of living in a garbage pit, while dark maw, red tongue, and white teeth and claws complete the look. Pose is what you would expect, with the central tentacle with the creature's 3 eyes clearly displayed. Good first effort, definitely playable. Score: Paint 15, Pose 15, Playability 15, Pizzazz 12, for a total of 57. Three years later, Wizards gives us a second Huge in 2007's Night Below set, called a Life Leech Huge. I don't know what that is, but perhaps it explains the spikes covering the body, something no other Huge has. He also seems pretty clean for a creature living in a garbage dump, with a lighter colored body and less of a dark wash. But the pose is far more animated than the first Huge. This guy is definitely attacking something, crouched low to bring its maw to bear, tentacles flailing about. Also, notice the drool dripping from its lower jaw. Score: Paint 13, Pose 18, Playability 15, Pizzazz 13, for a total of 59. WizKids gives us their first and so far only Huge in 2021's Boneyard set. This mini seems to be a merge of the previous two. The darker, dirtier hide of the first mini and the animated pose of the second. The teeth are not as pronounced on this mini, however, lowering the threat level just a touch in my opinion. Really though, you can't go wrong with any of these three offerings, so I say grab whatever is available and go for it. Score: Paint 13, Pose 16, Playability 16, Pizzazz 13, for a total of 58.
The Quarry are a race from the Dal Quor, the region of dreams. Found in the Eberron campaign setting, the Quarry are mostly insubstantial creatures, no longer able to manifest on the prime material plane. They are attempting to return, however, patiently guiding Eberron's populace via dreams and portents. Some have been able to take over select people, replacing their host's mind with their own. These unfortunate souls are referred to by the Quarry as the Inspired.
The Hashalak Quarry, also known as Dream Stealers, are from 2020's Eberron Rising from the Last War set. The Hashalak are the judges and intellectuals of Dal Quor. Far too interested in mortal concepts of pleasure, their inspired vassals tend toward hedonistic pursuits. As far as the mini goes, it's pretty basic, but book correct. A translucent blue, darkening towards the tail, emphasizes the ethereal nature of the creature. Playability is practically non-existent. Hashalaks are never seen in their actual form, so I'm not sure when you would have a chance to use this mini. Score: Paint 13, Pose 12, Playability 1, Pizzazz 15, for a total of 41. Also from Eberron Rising from the Last War, the Kalarok Quarry, also known as Eyebinders, are the nobility of the Dal Quor and the most powerful of the Quarry. Possibly immortal, They can control multiple beings, but their most fearful attribute is the ability to rip out a victim's soul and enslave it, binding it to one of the eyes endlessly swirling about the creature. The mini itself is quite impressive, looking like a cross between a snake, a spider, and a praying mantis, with a swirling red mist filled with eyes completely surrounding the body. As before, not sure how much playability it has, but it sure is cool. Score: Paint 20, Pose 22, Playability 3, Pizzazz 24, for a total of 69. The Sakura Quarry are the most common of the Quarry, and surprisingly, we have two options. The first Sakura was released by Wizards in 2007's Unhallowed set. Right off the bat, it's too big. The Sakura are medium size, and this one is obviously not. However, it looks really good. 3 colors, dark blue, black, and red, work well together. The pose is properly threatening, with pincers out and ready to strike. I also really like the face. You can sense the evilness behind its eyes. Playability again a factor, but as a DM, I might have to connive a way to play this mini. It's just too cool not to. Paint 22, Pose 21, Playability 2, Pizzazz 25, for a total of 70. Our second Sakura Quarry, like the other two, is from the Eberron Rising from the Last War set. Size is book correct, as is the coloring. A perfectly serviceable, if not overly impressive mini. I've beaten the lack of playability on these creatures into the ground, so let's toss this one a bone. As the most common of the Quarry and an uncommon mini, if you're going to figure out a way to bring the Quarry into your campaign, you'll probably want a few of these. Score: Paint 11, Pose 10, Playability 5, Pizzazz 7, for a total of 33.
The Skittering Horror is a new creature, making its first appearance in 5th edition D&D. Huge aberrations from the far realm, their fearful presence alone is enough to paralyze foes in terror, making them easy targets for their scythe-like forearms. Not much else is known about these terrifying creatures. They mostly appear in the Ravnicus campaign setting.
That being said, it's strange that we got our Skittering Horror mini in 2021's Boneyard set, not the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica set 3 years earlier. While the paint job is nothing special, uniform brown with a yellow eye, the aggressive posing more than makes up for it. 12 legs, 4 scythe-like forearms, tentacles around its mouth, and spikes on its back all give the mini a frightening presence. It's certainly a cool enough mini to make playability outside of Ravnica setting workable, and as an uncommon mini, it's easy to get. I ended up with 4 of these guys in my Boneyard case. Score: Paint 13, Pose 20, Playability 11, Pizzazz 18, for a total of 62.
The Slod are an interesting race of creatures. First appearing in 1980's Fiend Folio, the Slod epitomize chaos. Though roughly categorized by color, even then, no two Slodi are exactly alike. Native to Limbo, there are as many origin stories for the Slod as there are different types of Slod. Absolutely ferocious and equally unpredictable in battle, a Slod is just as likely to wander away from a battle bored as it is to fight to the death. I wasn't sure how to present the Slod minis, in order of appearance or by color, but since color isn't always the most descriptive, for example, the blue-hued Slod is known as both blue or taloned Slod, order of appearance it is.
We got our first Slotty in 2004's Giants of Legend set. The blue, or Talon Slod, is considered the most physically powerful of the Slod, slightly more so than their hated rivals, the Red Slod. This is a good early interpretation of the creature. Light blue with a darker coloration on its shoulders and back. The face paint is particularly well done for an early mini. The pose has him striding purposely toward a foe, Wolverine-like talons fully extended and ready to party. Score: Paint 14, Pose 16, Playability 13, Pizzazz 13, for a total of 56. The following year, we get our next slod in 2005's Angel Fire set. The red, or blood slod, is the most common of the slotty. Like its blue-toned rival, it's another brute ready to fight at the drop of a hat. As per its namesake, this mini is primarily in red, although it has splotches of lighter areas, mostly on the belly, but also on the legs, arms, back, and head. The coloring makes the face hard to make out, but I like it. Playability is solid, so I rate it similar to its blue cousin. Paint 14, Pose 14, Playability 13, Pizzazz 13, for a total of 54. The very next set in 2005, the Underdark, gives us our next slod mini. The Death Slod is, despite its smaller stature, considered the deadliest of the slotty. Known as Lesser Masters, these slods lean into the evil side of chaos with the ability to temporarily organize the lesser slod into mobs. The coloring on this mini is nothing to write home about, muted grays and reds, but the pose is quite good, with 2 weapons at the ready. There is some great detailing on this mini as well, particularly the front of his armor, the black details of the cloak, and his grim visage. Score: Paint 13, Pose 19, Playability 15, Pizzazz 18, for a total of 65. A year later, we get our first uncommon slod mini in 2006's Blood War. The green, or cursed slod, are highly intelligent shape changers and spellcasters. The paint is as expected, primarily green with a dark coloration on its shoulders and back, but I really like the face paint on this one. The yellow eyes have a distinct pupil, the inside of the mouth is pink, but what's with the eyebrows? Pose-wise, this doesn't exactly scream spellcaster. Frankly, with the wide smile and outstretched hand, he has casino greeter vibe to me. Probably just to get you off your guard. Score: Paint 13, Pose 10, Playability 15, Pizzazz 13, for a total of 51. Two years later, Wizards gives us another red slot in 2008's Demon Web set. Appropriately called a blood slot, I like this mini a lot more than the previous effort. The color is more vibrant and distinct, and the pose is much more threatening than the Angel Fire version, with arms raised above his head as if about to strike upon its foe. Small detail, I like his little tail. Overall score on this mini: Paint 16, Pose 16, Playability 15, Pizzazz 17, for a total of 64. In the same set, we get our second green slod, retitled as Curse Slod. As with the Blood Slod, this one is also an upgrade over Wizard's previous effort. Again, coloring is more vibrant and varied, and the pose is better as well. The mini is still not my idea of a spellcaster, but the positioning of the hands, the forward tilting stance, and the more lizard-like than frog-like head are all superior to the previous offering. Also, stubby tails must have been the fashion statement of 2008. Score: Paint 16, Pose 16, Playability 18, Pizzazz 18, for a total of 68. In 2009, we get the Slod Spawn in the Monster Manual Legendary Evils set. Slod tend to evolve from lesser to greater slotty, so it makes sense that the Slod spawns are blue, which along with the red are the lowest ranking of the slotty. Would have been cool if Wizards had done 2 versions of this, one red, one blue, but oh well. Paint and pose are fine. Blue on blue for the paint. Standard stand there with arm outstretched pose. Score: paint 12, pose 12, playability 12, pizzazz 9, for a total of 45. In the same Legendary Evils set, Wizards goes 3 for 3 in upgrading a previous mini, Meet the Talon Slod. As before, paint is generally better, with a darker, more uniform blue on the face and back, and a lighter blue on the chest and prominent belly. The pose is far more threatening as well, with one arm raised high above his head, ready to land a devastating blow on an unfortunate PC. The wider mouth and teeth are nicely done as well. Score: paint 17, pose 19, playability 15, pizzazz 19, for a score of 70. One year later, in 2009's Monster Manual Savage Encounters set, we get our first Black Slod. Also known as a Void Slod, these rare and powerful Sloddy are masters of entropy and the evilest of the Sloddy race, with some individuals actually becoming clerics to various gods of chaos. This mini sums up the Black Slod perfectly. Uniform black, slightly translucent with white dots in its eyes to mimic reflected light. The pose is appropriately threatening, with a face that, in my opinion, really conveys the evilness of this creature. Score: paint 13, pose 16, playability 16, pizzazz 20, for a total score of 65. Also from the same Savage Encounters set, we get our first Gray Slod. Also known as Rift Slods, the Gray Slod is the middle step between Green and Death Slod, as their primary job is to act as executioners for their Death Sloddy masters. As expected by its name, the color on this mini is uniform gray with a touch of white on the claws, eyes, and teeth. I quite like this pose. With the arms outstretched over its head, you can really make out the small bat-like wings under its arms. Finally, notice the real small scaling details on the back and legs. Nicely done. Score: paint 12, pose 19, playability 15, pizzazz 15, for a total of 61. WizKids jumps into the Slotty game in 2018's Monster Menagerie 3 set, also giving us a Gray Slod, but with two variants. As Gray Slods are even more obsessed with magic than Green Slods, WizKids gives us a second mini in the process of casting a fireball. Apart from the translucent orange of the fireball, both minis are identical, with an added touch of golden armbands and black spines and claws. Playability is equal for each variation, so overall score on these minis is paint 14, pose 19, playability 15, pizzazz 17, for a score of 65. Two years later, we got our next Slod in 2020's Fangs and Talons set. Back to being called a Green Slod, this guy definitely gives off spellcaster vibes. His greenness is somewhat covered by clothing, adding brown, tan, and dark blue to the color palette. Great pose. Love, love, love the skull top staff. The spikes on its back, including one much larger than the rest, and tendrils below its mouth emphasize the differences between individual Slotty. Score: paint 22, pose 23, playability 20, pizzazz 24, for a score of 89. A year later, we get the WizKids interpretation of a Death Slod in 2021's Boneyard set. Paint is pretty basic: gray body, black spines and claws, red tongue. The pose is standard: threatening lean forward, arms outstretched with prominent claws, open mouth. But it just doesn't work for me. The Death Slod are supposed to be the pinnacle of Slotty society, This guy just looks like another brawler to me. I prefer the more nuanced Wizards version to this one. Score: Paint 15, Pose 11, Playability 12, Pizzazz 12, for a total of 50. In 2023, we get an interesting slot in the Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen set. As an aside, I'm a huge fan of the Dragonlance books. Funny, I don't remember any slotty in them. Anyway, this is obviously a red slot, but note the purplish tadpoles clinging to its body. This is called a brood slod, and it's obviously meant to be den mother to the slotty young. As slotty reproduce by implanting eggs inside hosts, this could make for an interesting battle strategy of the brood slod flinging tadpoles at the party. I'll leave it to the individual DMs to determine the effect. Score: Paint 14, Pose 13, Playability 14, Pizzazz 14, for a score of 55.
Starspawn. Why oh why whizzes did you include Starspawn minis in non-Spelljammer sets? Now I gotta talk about them. Okay, fine. Starspawn originally appeared in the 4th edition Monster Manual 2 book and are creatures created by the Elder Evils to act as their agents in the Prime Material Plane. Summoned by warlocks or cultists, Starspawn have a singular purpose: to advance the interests of their particular evil elder master. They've also been known to hang out with beholders, aboleths, illithids, and others of that ilk. Fun guys.
We get the Starspawn Greater Emissary in 2022's Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft set, which does make sense, as one does appear in this campaign setting. This is actually a pretty impressive mini. Made of hard rather than soft plastic, the reddish color of the mini is offset by purple tentacles and the red eyes, black noses, and white fangs of multiple wolves' heads. Seriously, this guy must have eaten an entire pack. I count at least 10 wolf, or perhaps gnoll's heads, snarling from within the ooze-like body. Playability is probably limited to Van Richten or Spelljammer adventures, but I'm sure a clever DM can wrangle one into the game if he sets his mind to it. Score: Paint 14, Pose 15, Playability 8, Pizzazz 19, for a total of 56. Later in 2022, we get our second Starspawn in Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse set. The Starspawn Larva Mage is an interesting creature, created when an Elder Evil merges an emissary with the body of a cultist. Paint is very nicely done on this mini, with fine detailing work visible on its purple robes. A green cloak and white mask complete the look. The pose is appropriately culty, hand raised in prayer, weapon at the ready. Also, note the fine details on the belt pouch and especially the scroll holder at his side. And the fringe at the bottom of his cloak, I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. Score: Paint 21, Pose 18, Playability 13, Pizzazz 20, for a total of 72. Also from the Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse set, we get a Starspawn Hulk. As you can imagine, these guys are the muscle of the Elder Evils. I gotta say, WizKids put a lot of work into a mini that, in my opinion, won't see much play. The hard plastic, transparent skin shows off the internal purple bone and red musculature, while the wide open mouth and closed fists convey aggressiveness. Very cool, but I just won't use it. Score: Paint 18, Pose 13, Playability 8, Pizzazz 20, for a total of 59.
Our final aberration is the unspeakable horror. Formed in the mists of the domains of dread, no two unspeakable horrors are exactly alike. The body can be muscle, stone, exoskeletons, or anything else a deranged mind can imagine. Same with limbs, tentacles, spider legs, clawed hands. You get the picture. Existing for a single purpose: crush, kill, destroy. An adventuring party will definitely have its hands full if it takes on one of these.
we get our only unspeakable horror mini in 2022's Von Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. A uniform green with white highlights on the body, claws, and face tentacles complete the color palette, while the pose is most assuredly aggressive. I really like how he has a hand and claws at the end of one arm, but a single hook on the other. Playability is solid. I can see using this guy as a bodyguard / attack dog for a final boss encounter. Score: Paint 11, Pose 15, Playability 13, Pizzazz 14, for a total of 53.
And here they all are, boys and girls, in all their glory. From Aboleth to Unspeakable Horror, we had a total of 107 different Aberrations minis for your review. Our reviews ran the gamut, from a low score of 20 on a poor Grail miniature, to a couple perfect 100s with a WizKids Beholder and a Wizard's Nothic. Anyways, enjoy the cavalcade of Aberrations. And with that, gentle viewer, we are done with the Aberrations. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you like these, I'll continue on. Otherwise, it was an interesting experience for me making these videos. If you would like me to continue and have a specific creature type you'd like to see next, let me know in the comments as well. The lawful neutral side of me says stay in alphabetical order, so the next planned review would be beasts, feline, canine, ursine, porcine, and everything in between, both the dire and regular varietals. However, if the chaotic neutral factions want me to skip around, let me know, and let me know what you'd like to see next. Undead, perhaps? Giants? Or skip straight to dragons? Anyways, this is your friendly neighborhood eye tyrant saying thanks again for watching Eye of the Beholder.